Yeah. So I call the December meeting of the Joint Church to order. Tim is running behind, as I mentioned, and so we'll do we have his treasurer's report. We'll go through that. He's not here. We have the approval of the October minutes. Any corrections, changes?
Make a motion to approve as drafted.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right. Good.
I'll abstain.
Yes, I should abstain. No. It seemed like I was, but I guess that's not been.
Well, if you if you listen to the tape, then you can actually vote on these things. We didn't have a meeting in November, so I didn't make a note of that on the agenda, so you can keep track of that. All right. You have Tim's treasurer's report. He has starting balance.
You have a couple extra treasurer's reports. I did not.
We have a couple extras.
Copy that. And then I just have.
So you had an opening balance of $5,920.65. There was deposits made. And then a series of checks that were issued for Quicken, Bucks County Planning Commission, deployment. Yes, let's go. Cohen Law Group, he found I guess, did you get it? Was it a nasty gram from?
No, he was very polite. He just said there's an outstanding bill and I forwarded it on to Tim and Chester for payment.
From November of last year, so for December. So it was, well, it went to Jerry. So we never made it, for some reason, made it over to us. And then the only other one that's missing, there's $250 for Leah for the videotaping. So we need to add that on to the list. So the balance, the final balance would be what's reported here, less $250. That extra check in. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the treasurer's report.
So moved.
With a second. Dennis, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Solicitor.
Thank you. So I'll just go through the tracking sheet that I shared with everybody. And also I had forwarded on an email that I did get from Joel Winston at the Cohen Group. So the first ordinance is the wireless communications ordinance. He is reviewing some proposed revisions that all three municipalities had. The email that he sent me back is basically a reminder, aside from explaining the different types of wireless facilities. It's essentially a reminder to all of us that all three municipalities need to identify the locations of where these towers are going to be within the municipalities. There are some that have been located for the tower-based facilities. We have locations in Newtown, an existing tower in Upper Make, and then some locations in Wrightstown. But right now, they don't have any listings for non-tower facilities. So all the municipalities will need to come up with locations for those. I'll send emails to the solicitors and remind them that we need to do that. And then once he's had a chance to get through some of the other proposed revisions, I'll bring them back and get them to everybody for review. The electric vehicle charging station, we're still just waiting for comments on that ordinance.
Give me an update.
Oh, great.
So we did pass it.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we passed it with a provision for Newtown that separates it from the rest of the jointure. We had a few things that we wanted, but we forgot to send it on that night that we passed it. So by the next meeting, I promise it will
It's on the agenda.
all be done.
Okay. Great, thank you. The same for the billboard ordinance. We're waiting for some additional comments from the municipalities. The parking core apartments, that's a private request, so there's nothing more to do on that. The LIOLI overlay district, the revised ordinance has now been adopted by all the municipalities. Copies have been provided to the County Planning Commission and to the Law Library. And then there was one new ordinance that we can start talking about tonight. It's not on the list here, but it is on the tracking sheet. It's one that's being proposed by Wrightstown. It's a cleanup of some provisions that are in section 1506, which is provisions that relate to the zoning hearing boards of each municipality. Currently, there are two sections that we want to fix. Currently, the first section says that notice of zoning hearings will be published once, at least 10 days before the date fixed for the hearing, which is not at all consistent with the MPC, which requires twice, once a week for 2 weeks, which the new language in the ordinance would clean up and make consistent with the MPC. And then the second provision is right now, when a zoning hearing board application comes in, the township is supposed to provide notice to the affected municipality's zoning officer, the municipal secretary or manager, the affected local planning commission, the secretary treasurer of this joint zoning council, and the joint planning commission. I don't know that any municipality is actually following those notice requirements. I'm sure internally you have your own procedures about who gets notice and who doesn't get notice, but certainly I don't know that anybody's been providing notice to the secretary or treasurer of the joint zoning council, and we don't have a joint planning commission, right, that's active right now. So the proposal is to just delete that section and let everybody take care of who they notify internally on their own. There is still a separate requirement of notifying, affected property owners that are within 500 feet, that sort of thing. So that doesn't do away with that requirement, just what we need to do internally. So that's the sum of the entire ordinance, those two sections.
What was the name of that ordinance? What name did you give it?
Let me say, zoning hearing board provisions. So what I will do, unless anybody has any questions or has any objections, would be to send this out to the solicitors and get this on an upcoming planning commission for everybody to review. And hopefully we'll be able to move it along. It's not anything earth shattering, so just some cleanup.
I have two questions. Becky.
Sure.
You mentioned that we have, Upper Michigan has one tower. They only have, I can think of at least three. Am I thinking?
I thought we identified 3 sites.
There's only one listed in here.
Okay,
And it just has the tax map parcel, so I can't tell you whether, or not, where it is, without looking it up. I will double check and make sure that he didn't miss it.
There is more than one.
There is more. Okay, so you're saying you think there's 3 total?
Well,
We're-
I
Yeah,
can
but-
think it's three. There may be 4.
we're certain that there's 3. We can provide the tax parcel numbers.
That
And
would
I
be
had
great.
thought we had a discussion in the meeting about a zoning district, at least in Upper Makefield for the other facilities.
Okay, for the
Didn't we have that
non-tower.
discussion? Yeah, we had a long discussion about that. We'll have to review what we discussed, though. I don't remember.
Okay.
I have one question on the parking court.
Mhm.
You said it's a private request,
Yeah.
even though they're asking for input from the joint partners?
Well, so at this point, we don't have an updated ordinance from them to even circulate to the jointure members.
Okay, so the original ordinance they proposed is,
That's my understanding
that's
is
done?
No, but-
that it has been, has seen possibly a couple different versions, but nothing has been provided to this group yet for review.
Yeah, no.
Anybody else? I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you.
If no other questions, then that concludes my report.
All right, planner. Hello.
Yeah, so this is the last meeting that we,
Sorry,
in October, when we met, it was mentioned that maybe the joint would look at or consider updating the zoning ordinance. And I think you had a couple of real specific areas, but as we talked it through, I believe I was drafted to put a proposal together to update the ordinance. So I have copies. I don't know if anybody needs one, but they were sent out yesterday, I guess. So I don't know if everybody's had a chance to look at it or read through it. If there are any questions, I can just put those. Do you have a copy? I did. Oh, okay.
Did you send it to us or did you send it to the township?
I sent it out to everybody yesterday, so.
You did, okay.
No, I haven't. I had a question.
Yeah,
Anybody
okay.
else need a copy?
Can I have one?
I'll take one. Thanks, sister.
Yours good?
Yeah. You got an extra, just keep walking.
Let's make the full circle.
Please and thank you.
Sure, you're welcome. So just to give you, a little bit of background in terms of going through and trying to come up with, the proposal and an estimate. Basically, what I did was I looked through the existing ordinance and broke it down by article to just sort of explain in, the scope of work part, what would be covered under each article. And there could be additions to the ordinance in terms of wherever you want to put the wireless communications facility, because it stays in the uses or because of the volume of it. I don't know if you want to sort of pull it out separate. And there are some other opportunities to provide like, alternative energy regulations. They could be under the uses, or that could be something like invasive or. So it really just depends how the committee would want to sort of structure those. So basically, the scope of work is broken down by article and basically looking at, what the update for each article would entail more or less. I had sort of put out in an email back in October or November, if any of the townships had any like known issues to let me know, and I didn't receive any input, like I didn't receive any feedback that there's something known that's a troublesome ordinance. So I think it's more just an update. Going through, the update would cover the zoning ordinance work in terms of the text as well as any map work. I know for one, the overlay, the new overlay that was adopted would be put on. There might be some other things. I'm not sure how up to date the map is. I don't think there's been any zoning changes, but just to make sure that's up to date. If there's any current split zone parcels, something we always recommend to sort of clear up, so we can check that and we come back with recommendations. I don't recall that I've seen, and when I've seen proposals in this area, I don't recall that there's been split zones, so I don't know.
I would, Wrights Town actually, and we haven't talked about it as a board yet, but I was looking in Pineville at some of the parcels there. We have a couple properties that the zoning district splits through the parcels, so it's kind of awkward. So I think that's like something that we will want to get cleaned up.
That is awkward, and it's hard too, because, zoning changes and that gets into a whole nother issue of, trying to pass those, and depending on what the districts are, it affects property owners. But generally, it is hard when a property split zone, because if it goes to be developed in any way, there are different sets of regulations. It really does get messy, so. So anyway, that's something, I wasn't aware of those parcels, but that's something we'd want to look at and try to clear up. Also, if there's any changes, I don't know if there would be anything to the highway classification map. I really don't think there is, but we would check all that, the highway classification, the floodplain district, the historic districts. I'm thinking they're probably pretty common. This is a little bit different. I saw this in another proposal, for another community, one of my colleagues worked on. They actually put a work program in there in terms of how they would anticipate, how we would anticipate going through the update. What I've always done before, when I think back, it's sort of a little bit backwards in the sense of, I've usually started from the beginning and gone to the end of the document. So usually you're starting with the definitions, and then you go through the districts and the uses. But as you go along, there's always definitions that come up that you have to go back and put in. You always have to go back to the different sections if you work on it that way. So what I thought I would do, and this is of course for discussion, if you were to go through with an update, you can determine how you want to proceed with each article. But I sort of mixed it up a little bit to say, the uses would be sort of the first task, deal with all the uses. Make changes, where you feel there might be changes needed, maybe there's additional uses we want to add. Then go to the table of permitted uses, determine where the uses and how they would be permitted, where they would be permitted and how. And that also gets into the district work, making sure there's consistency there. Also, if there's any issues in terms of some of the regulations, area and dimensional regulations, that would be addressed in that task. And as we go through that, that's going to be like, there's going to be definitions that come up. So we're going to go back at the end and sort of pull that together. The zoning map sort of follows suit, that we would sort of look at that when we're talking about the districts or right after. Then just getting to the rest of the articles in the zoning ordinance, the environmental performance standards, design regulations, signs. I know that's one that I think the committee really discussed that we want to put some time into. And I think there's opportunity for a lot of additions or some changes. Non-conforming uses. And then, individual use of administration, actually, what we just talked about within the ordinance that you mentioned, Vicki, those types of regulations towards the end of the document. And then finally, going back to the definitions, and finishing up the project by making sure that's all up to date and consistent with county ordinance. In terms of, looking at the draft development, the first draft development, that is sort of pulled together once you go through all the different articles. Then you review it, then there's a second draft development, and then there's a final adoption draft development that was each of the helpful for final review and adoption. This can change, but we just put it in terms of the intermediate or the initial draft that you get, it would be PDF rather than printed copies. That's not a big deal if you want printed copies. I think that's, it just seems like PDF is the way most, communities are going in terms of looking at the specific section. But when we look into the full document, I think a lot of people want the whole, the printed copies. So then at that point, we would also provide. In terms of the cost, we came up with a cost of $32,000. And that's to go through the whole document as, the zoning ordinance, all of the text. And I will say, I looked at some of the other recent proposals, the contracts we worked on for zoning ordinance. I don't know how much longer to write into that, but I went for many years. But Haycock, for instance, is one community, they are 36,000. Langhorne, that's, Haycock 35, Langhorne's 36 something. A proposal that was just drawn up. So I know this seems like a high amount, but based on well, to me it does. To me, everything seems high, I'll be honest with you. But in terms of, if you go through the whole document to update, that's it.
Did you work on Haycox?
You know what, I worked on, Haycock is actually part of the Quakertown Area Joint Planning Commission. It's set up differently than this group. So I did work on like the model ordinance back in the
I meant
early 2000s.
the BCPC.
Yeah.
Not you specifically, but it's just, okay.
So they're
Okay,
previous one. I'm not working on their update right now.
okay.
Yeah. They're a unique group. They don't share the same zoning, but they do plan together. So they did create like an overall zoning ordinance that was intended to be adopted by all the communities. Haycock now just decided they wanted to update theirs. So. And also along these lines, when we talked about looking in grant possibilities, basically what comes up as the most logical grant possibility for this type of document update is the MAP grant, and that's the grant that we received for the plan update. So that grant will cover, if you get it, it covers up to 50% of the total cost. I did reach out to the state, I'll be honest with you, since I started talking to them about the grant that we applied for last time, there've been so many different people, but the last person I spoke to, Isabella Fiumi, who's now the local government planning specialist for this region. She indicated that, and we know that it's a rolling deadline for the grant applications, but they only select grants 2 times a year, in the spring and in the fall. So the fall was September 1st, applications had to be in, that's over. To be considered for spring 2025, that's March 1st, the application would need to be in. So we do have time, to proceed and try to put an application forward. I know what we did last time, we reached out, we got letters of support, all that takes a little bit of time, but I think we had quite a few letters of support and they, put it all together in a package we did, and then they did actually approve it. They didn't approve 50%, but that was like the pandemic time, so I know, their funding was all different. In terms of what Isabella told me, she did say that they bumped up the amounts in their department for grant possibilities, so she seemed positive, when I was talking to her.
So this would be potentially 50% of this amount. Okay. Up to 30.
Mhm.
And then divided by 3,
Right.
or however the.
Whatever the formula is, yeah. Okay.
I mean, there's no guarantee. But
Yeah. My question was about the timeline, but I think I just missed it. I saw you 2 years in here.
Yeah, so, I'm glad you mentioned that, Ben, because I was originally thinking a year. And then I know, right? Because really, I think like if you try to do uses, that could take meetings, right? But a lot of the articles, like maybe the nonconformity, that could be 1 meeting, I'm thinking. But then talking to my colleagues, it's like, no, put it as 24 months at a minimum. If you're done earlier, you're done earlier. There's nothing that says you have to go that long. But just knowing how sometimes discussions do go on and continue, we thought that was a safer time.
So with the MAP grant, they would, as we make payment from the jointure to you, the MAP grant would offset 50% at that time, or is it done at the end of the 24 months?
Excuse me, I would have to check with them how they prefer it. Now, what I know for the last time, I believe what they told me was they preferred it to be either all at the end or at least 2, maybe 3 at the most reimbursements. I don't know if that still stands or not. What we did for the comp plan was 2. We did it partway through, and then when it was final, we did like the remaining amount.
And it's not backward looking, right? Like, in other words, we can't get started on the ordinance and have it reimburse us. I think it has to start new, right?
You know what, and that sort of we ran into an issue with the comp plan, because we did do that. And we started it before we knew that, they were gonna approve the grant or not. But then trying to work back, it wasn't gonna cover a couple of the initial meetings because it predated that, like their time limit. So I think that's, it's up to the committee. If you decide you want to go, move forward with an update and you want to try to start this a lot sooner than you would know about the grant, that's totally up to the committee. But yeah, I don't know if we get reimbursed. When you submit the grant, they'll look at also like certain line items, so it has to match up. So if the grant amount, let's say we apply for 32 and we get half of that, it's 16. Had to think for a minute. When you submit to get reimbursed, they're gonna, at the end, it has to all add up 100. Like I can't just submit part of it, so if the committee pays for part of the project beforehand, before it's eligible, that gets you can't really be first for them.
Right, okay.
So is there a time limit as to how long we can drag the project on? We're talking, I have a reason for asking that question, but because we're talking about 24 months. But I have in the back of my mind, the codification process. So we still have to take all this stuff and go through template code. And I was wondering whether we could include a line item like of $20,000 or $30,000 additional for codification,
You know, I don't know.
because
Like if the grant would cover that. you're
Yeah.
saying? I will check. I want to say, I don't know that it will, but let me follow up and check.
because all that, because if we every time we make changes, we've got to backfill into the electronic version of the zoning ordinance. So it's all going to get taken care of at some point here. And if you make major changes to sections and stuff, that means a major change at the codifier as well. So
So
48 months.
So the
What's that?
question,
48 months.
That's what I'm thinking.
Well-
It's gonna be like a comprehensive plan.
Well, if we, I mean, normally our updates are done like once a year, but I think if we had a special project, it was okay, well, we've adopted this new ordinance.
Sure.
We could go to general code and say, hey, look, this is the new version. We need to get you going on it right away and not wait 12 months for our normal process.
oh, because you're saying at the end of the year is when?
Well, they generally do that. In fact, we have an update right now in it being programmed. But if we had something special, we could still, I think we could go back to general code and say, hey, look, we have 5,000 pages we want to add to our zoning ordinance, they'll jump on it right away as opposed to waiting.
Mhm. I mean, I'll check. I'll reach out to, BPD. I don't know. Let me check and see what they say.
Because that will be, I mean, that is an expense. So, in addition to the 50% of the planning activities, it would be nice if we get 50% of the other administrative work that needs to get done after the ordinance is adopted.
Okay. So the codification general, you had thrown out like 20,000-30,000, is that?
Yeah, well, our normal codification for is probably like for $4,000, so we've got like 6-7 ordinances that are kind of sitting in queue right now. I haven't gotten the most recent update. I know they're recalculating it. But it was like 3,500 for the draft numbers that they gave me. And then they're coming back with the revised ones after we've got the new the LI ordinance in place. So they're coming up with a revision on that. So, and those are just, we're just targeting, we're just adding small pieces to it, as opposed to making major changes.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay, let me ask them, that, Chester, I have no idea. I know I have like the guidelines, I don't have them with me, but I have the guidelines of what the grant covers. I don't remember seeing anything that specifies something like that, but it might. They might cover it. So let me check on that. Ratification. So basically, in the sense of that would be part of one application, so that would be all part of it.
Yep.
Is there anything else?
Thank you.
So what-
I mean, what are your thoughts? Is this like what you were thinking or?
It needs to be done.
I mean, honestly, when I look at the jointures ordinance, I think it's in relatively good shape. Like, I think it's more up to date than many that I've seen. But yeah, just, I mean, it's just generally the cost.
So do we want to move forward on this or want to talk about it? I mean, I would make a decision to move forward with it with or without a grant, right? I mean, you're not going to make a decision to do it just because you can get a grant. So it needs to be done. It needs to be done, right? Yeah, my
Has it
question
been
is gonna be the
amended?
timing and then.
Has it been amended since 2006? So it's 18, right?
Well, that's the date on the ordinance, but there have been amendments made along the way. Like, for instance, the riding academy, I know is listed on the, pull up the code, that's a recent one, and we've been working on a lot of them recently. But it's not going through looking at the ordinance from beginning to end.
Yeah, all of the ordinances that have been adopted through 2023 are in there. Anything that was adopted in 2024 hasn't been integrated into the text of the zoning ordinance. But it's up there so that people can still see it.
Well, and certainly it hasn't been looked at since the adoption of the new comprehensive plan
No.
either. So,
Yeah, and that's part of like under some of the language in the proposal is really certain areas, you know, you lend more to making sure it's consistent with the comp plan. And I don't think were that many changes in terms of recommendations that will affect it, but there might be some.
Do you think the chances are good for the grant money?
I mean, I don't know how to, now I can't say, however, when I did speak with the representative from the PCED, she was very positive. Part of it is you just did a comp plan. They're familiar with it in the sense that we got a MAP grant for that. So to follow up with an ordinance update sort of seems like a logical next step. They'd like to see that. You plan jointly, your 3 municipalities versus 1, that's in your favor. So I think she sounded very positive. So,
Because if you did get the grant money for half of it, it would be about 5,300 each township.
well, I think you have an expenditure percentage.
Yeah.
You,
I'm just going off this number.
oh, right.
Yeah.
So it's a consensus to have us go for the grant.
I would think so. Why not?
The town's point,
Yeah, but don't we want to do it anyway? I mean,
yeah, whether we do.
Well, I mean, again, if we don't have we don't want to spend a lot. We need to think about spending too much money up front without the grant, because then we may have to pay for it, ourselves.
So the only point I'm making is that if it's something we need to do, I wouldn't let the grant determine. If we need to do it, we should do it. If we don't need to do it, we should not do it. Forget the grant.
Just to, not to interrupt you, Tom, but just to add something. My recollection of the previous grant applications, we had to show them that the committee was committed, that you had adopted the resolutions, that you adopted, like, that all had to be part of the grant application package.
So what you really want is 2 motions, one to move forward with the proposal, the second is to move forward with the grant.
And we would take that back to our respective decision we make here.
Well, the decision here would be that we'd ask Vicky to prepare a resolution, send it to the 3 townships for approval.
Okay.
And that would get us over that hurdle. And then the next step and kind of that resolution is also authorizing Bucks County Planning Commission to prepare an application so we could for a grant. So we kind of cover both things with one resolution. So it kind of commits the townships to doing something at that point.
For the comp plan, grant application, we listed Upper Mayfield was the grant tour. Is that the right word? The grant tour? Grantor. So it was sort of processed through Upper Mayfield. I don't know, I guess I have to maybe look into more because you have an intergovernmental agreement, right? I'd like to check on that because I didn't understand why it can just be the jointure based on that.
we have a checking account and we have all that kind of stuff, so.
Right. But remember, Upper Mayfield had, and I think previously, didn't Wrightstown previously?
Yes,
Thank you. I think I've always thought you always needed a township to do it. That's been the process for as long as I can remember.
Yeah, so maybe maybe that's why. So in that case, if that's the case, I'll double check with them.
I never asked a question as to why, but I just assumed that was,
So then if that is the case, we would need the township to be.
Can I ask a stupid question? Can people hear me?
Yes.
I thought that we asked the commission to look at specifically about including signs, pictures, and illustrations. This is much broader revision of the entire JMZO. I just wondered, is this what we were asking for at the last meeting?
I agree with you, John. That's what I thought too.
it's a good question to ask. I mean, to follow up on that, the next logical question that goes with it is, do we actually need it? What happens if we don't do it?
I mean, I thought it was a good idea to include pictures and so on.
That, you know, having definitions more widely acceptable or known when you look at it. So this is a much different thing than I thought we were talking about.
Well, once you start to tear that apart, though, and you add definitions, you have to go back and start going through and integrating them. So it gets to be better to have something comprehensive that works rather than a patchwork of, I mean, would you agree, Vicky?
Yeah, and I thought the conversation had started out with, as Chester suggested, with let's get some illustrations for the definitions, and then signs came in and we started talking about signs, and then we started talking about some other issues in other parts of the ordinance. So my understanding was that we were going to get exactly what we got, which was a quote for the whole ordinance from beginning to end, thinking that that was the most comprehensive way to do it instead of trying to do it piecemeal. But certainly that's at the pleasure of the townships, not me.
That's just not my, it's not my recollection, and it's not reflected that way in the minutes that we just approved. So I'm not quite sure if this is the scope we were asking for. I don't know. It seems very ambitious.
I think what we're doing right now, if we look at these resolutions that we've kind of talked about, is just to get an idea of what it would cost, whether we get a grant. And we're not making a future decision. It would be a future decision to approve everything. I mean, I still see it as we're gathering information. This is a lot.
So we don't have to do anything, right? So my understanding is that if we did nothing, the current system still works. It's really a question of whether we want to improve it or not. So we are not pressed to make a decision to do it tonight. We could do it later. We could not do it at all.
Yeah, we can certainly have continued discussion about it, digest this information.
You're back to a couple of board members who wouldn't be here.
Right.
You guys are covered.
However, being mindful that if the townships decide to move forward, we kind of need to make a decision in the next few months if we're going to take advantage of the grant, right?
Yeah.
Or sooner rather than later, really.
Yeah.
Can I ask, like, so what?
They have it to be considered in the spring now. I think it was not so definite of one date before, but she did indicate that to me. Now it would be like March 1st, September 1st, the 2 dates that they're firm on, the application being in by.
Yeah. I was just kind of, so what are the risks of not revising it? Can the developer come in, pick through our roots and say, find a loophole that should have been changed from 10 years ago? Is that?
Well, I mean, I think that's a possibility with any ordinance if somebody studies it enough. We're not aware of anything right now because we're not, I think we have the one, this parking core, is that in relation to a challenge? Or we did have one challenge that was out there a couple of years ago, right? It was a potential challenge, but not, I mean, we're not, no one's coming in and saying your ordinance is deficient the way it is right now with anything that we're aware of. So, I mean, but we can't predict what's going to happen in the future. Somebody could come in and say, you don't provide for this, or there could be a new use that we haven't captured yet. So it's definitely always a possibility.
Would it be a stronger ordinance by doing this process, or is that subjective?
Well, it is and it isn't. So to me, it's not subjective because as you're improving and looking at the comprehensive plan that was just adopted and making things better along the way, I always think it's making it stronger. But that doesn't mean when you go through a whole process like this, especially when it's going from the front to the back of the ordinance, there's always a couple things that when you put the ordinance in place and go out into practice, you always find a couple little things that didn't get captured because it's just such a comprehensive review. And actually, when Lisa was saying that we did that in Warrington, and what happened was we went through this whole process with the county. We didn't work with Lisa, but we worked with other people there. They did a fantastic job. But then what happened on the back end was, as we were going along, when the ordinance was in place, we were making a list of different things that came up that had been missed. And then we actually had the county stay on and help us make those revisions so that the ordinance was addressing items that we were seeing in practicality every day after working with the ordinance. So it's tough to come up with a foolproof and bulletproof plan or ordinance.
Right.
Chester, I have another question. You brought up some expenses relating to getting whatever they say the big revision. It sounds expensive to get it codified. Can you go over that again? I'm not quite sure.
I don't have an exact number. I mean, I normally for this year, it's going to cost us around $3,500 or plus or minus to codify the 6 ordinances that were adopted this year into the zoning ordinance. And what that means is that they take these paper copies and they integrate it into the PDF document that you have on the on the web. So that's just part of that codification process. It's just like the OLI ordinance as an example, the overlay. Right now, it's sitting as a paper file up with general code. It doesn't appear in the actual ordinance book. It's there, it's an effect, but it's not nicely integrated for folks to be able to use it.
Right. But do we have an estimate of, you got $32,000 for the?
No, well, no, we don't. I mean, the estimate and an estimate would be based on what we tell the codifier we want them to do. And again, I'm taking a guess that it's probably going to, if we're going to make a front to back changes in the zoning ordinance, there's a lot of paper that are going to have to get shuffled and I'm not going to say basically word processed into the
So let's take your number you threw out as a guess off the table and just call it tens of thousands of dollars. So we don't get caught up in.
Well, but if we can go for the other thing, if we do go the grant route,
Agreed. If we
we need to have some number there.
What I'm hearing is, we're not all comfortable with this yet. And if we're not all comfortable with this yet, I think it's more money than what everybody thought it was. We don't necessarily need to do it. Of course, it's good to make it more clear. And of course, it's good to tie it out. But I think you might want to take just a meeting or so to think about this is more money than we thought and make sure everybody's comfortable with the expense. That's the vibe I think I'm getting.
Yeah, but I mean, that's why we're here. That's why we're the jointure. I mean, I was a little shocked when we saw the number, but we're splitting it 3 ways. And that's why I joined zoning committee. And if this makes it better and we're trying to prevent more development, whatever, and if this helps us, then we should do it.
The number seems to be more like $50,000 when you get into the codification and everything. And the grant is not something that's, sure we're gonna get. And the grant, you say only would cover half of the expense, is that correct?
It covers up to half. So actually, they could give you a grant for less than half, but I think generally they do half it.
But only half of your work would be covered.
Well, I will check with them about the codification fee. I don't know about that.
Right.
I'm sort of doubtful, but I don't know for sure. So I would want to double check.
Just keep in mind, again, anytime we make an ordinance change, it requires a cost to codify those changes into the zoning ordinance. So that, it's not only providing, doing all the electronic stuff and doing all the indexing. They print out hard copies that are available for the townships. So there's a whole series of things that are part of that process.
And John, I think we all think about the risk versus reward. I mean, does this help us avoid some sort of possible litigation? Any of our townships get into it with a developer or builder or whoever, man, this is, it's tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees in a snap. So, is this an investment in maybe lowering those litigation risks?
It's always easier to have all the documents in one place. Instead of you see a book, you think, it's all complete. And all of a sudden there's another ordinance sitting out that you haven't seen. And that carries a risk.
And certainly my original suggestion a couple months ago with putting in photographs and illustrations in the definition section was more to improve the clarity of the information that's in the ordinance and provide, better information for our residents on, this board as we're looking through the ordinance. But it's not necessary. I mean, what we have works perfectly well. But there are always questions that come up, and then, it's like we get into this interpretation question.
I think people thought your idea was a good idea. And as far as protecting us against litigation, I mean, that's a myth, because these developers are very creative in how they come after us that our ordinance doesn't have this, it doesn't have that. Ordinance doesn't have garage core apartment building. I mean, whoever thought of that? And, you can't anticipate every kind of legal challenge that's going to come down the road. It's impossible.
Well, the other thing I'll say that just because a developer comes and says that they want to put in core apartments or whatever that terminology is, it doesn't mean that the municipalities have to agree to it. And, it could be that it could be that Newtown and the jointure says, no, that's not right for the jointure at all. And we're going to oppose it and we're willing to fight it. Now, there's a risk involved in doing that, but Upper Makefield fought high density zoning in the upper portion of the township 15 years ago. It was 20 years ago. I forget. You're still fighting it. But at the same time, the developer said Upper Makefield is in the path of development, and therefore we need to put 1,000 units up in the Upper Mayfield area. Those units didn't get built because there was, solidarity in terms of fighting against it. But just because you get challenged doesn't necessarily mean that you have to accept that challenge.
I think you're better safe than sorry.
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion as one member of this group, so I'm all for proceeding in this direction. I'm just sensing that everyone's kind of a little surprised by the expense. And it just takes a meeting or two to get everybody's head around it.
Well, I think Lisa feels, she said they seem very positive, up to half.
Yeah.
I wouldn't make a
feel
decision on
positive,
that.
But I don't say it as a guarantee.
No, I understand that.
Put that in the minutes, please think again.
I'd like to think of that.
It's coming out of her consulting.
There's nothing wrong with thinking about it for a meeting or two.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't have to make a decision tonight, but I think, we would have to make a decision in January if we were going to try to get to that March 1st deadline. So
Draft a resolution, and there's no obligation.
Grant writing.
You want to make
These
sure
townships
it's comfortable.
Well, it took a while. it took a while to prepare the last grant, because, you know, there's a couple different steps to it. There's writing involved in it. But what I think took a while too was trying to get, like, reaching out for the letters of support, because I think we reached out to some legislators and, the Newtown Business Commons, the county, I think the county commissioners. I think we got a county endorsement, or letter of, recommendation. So that, just to sort of reach out, get them, compile it all, that takes a little time.
So it might not even be until September.
No. What I'm saying is,
If there's no rush to.
oh, right, certainly. But what I'm saying is, I mean, I think the committee should take time to decide how you want to move forward. January is fine. February might even be fine. But that's sort of kind of close. So if you want to get an application in by March.
What's the deadline in the spring for the grant application? Do you know?
March.
Yeah, the application would have to be in by March 1st.
And in the fall, what would it be?
In the fall, September is what they call it.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
September 1st?
September 1st. 9/1.
Yeah, I personally don't see a need for a real rush for like January. February may be okay, but then you really rush to get the grant application together, so I don't know. I mean, I am reluctant to rush into it. Of course, I'm not going to be an elected official by the time this even starts, so I'm just saying.
So that means that you wouldn't oppose the application? Or are you opposing the application?
I'm not opposing anything. I'm just saying, let's take a breath and think about it. I think that's the consensus anyway.
I propose we take it back and take a look at this in January and see where folks are.
I agree with that.
Sounds like a good idea.
But if there, for some reason, there's no meeting in January because of weather or something, then that's gonna push it to February. Can we call another meeting to just address that?
Well, I don't think there's any rush. If we don't get it by March, we'll get it by September.
We'll have a window in January, but if you're gonna advertise for another meeting, it's trying to come up with a consensus on a date, and it has always been difficult to find a consensus on dates other than the first Thursday, so. But it could be,
At 7 o'clock.
what's that?
Yeah, 7 o'clock we agreed on, right?
Yeah, let's not forget that.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
So that gives us a half an hour more.
I want to be out of here half an hour earlier.
You're here. We're doing it.
That's why we're doing it. All right. Man, if we're gonna be here till 9 o'clock, better, I mean. All right, so we'll table this discussion for the time being. All right. Codification process, again, just kind of mention that is that the codifier had a preliminary proposal to us to do the codification, and then we had there was some switch around with the old
LIOLI.
that one, yeah. Zoning ordinance. So they're coming back with a revised proposal. So as soon as that comes in, I'm going to sign off on it and get it going, because we're going to need to get that. So it's going to be like maybe $3,500, $4,000 to do that codification.
Do you need a motion?
I think we already have a motion that we had approved that, so. We've just been, this thing's been taking forever to get it to the front. New business, we need to authorize the solicitor to advertise for the dates for 2025 at 7 p.m. And you
Yes, so we have two date issues. One is the first meeting for January, because it would be January 2nd, which would be even before reorg by our townships. So I don't know what we want to do about that meeting for January in the first place, when we want to have it.
January 9th, right?
Well, January 9th is Wrightstown's Planning Commission. Not to say that we can't not have a meeting for the Planning Commission that night, but I don't know if any other townships have a conflict that night. Sure, yeah.
We can send the planning commission over into the small room. Or they can join us.
Yeah.
Either way.
There you go. And the only other date is July 3rd would be the one for July. So there's consideration of just skipping a July meeting and meeting in June and August and not trying to reschedule one for July. So if we do that, then we just need to come up with a date for January.
So is everybody okay with going to the next week, which would be
The 9th.
January the 9th?
Yeah.
All
Okay.
the meetings will be at 7:00 here.
Yes. And so I will advertise January 9th as the first. I'll advertise all the other months and we'll skip July.
That's good.
Good solution.
You need a motion to.
Yeah, do we have
So moved.
Tom, do we have a second?
Second.
Dennis? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Wrightstown Solicitor will continue as our solicitor for next year, so that's the second year in that term.
You'll have me.
Well, you gotta get through the reorg in Wrightstown.
That's right. That's right. That's true.
Once you get through that, then you're a shoe-in of hair, but that's a tough crowd up there.
Yep.
Okay. Privilege of the floor. I sent everybody by email a survey that it just came out through the morning news and PSATs just a couple of days ago. And basically the governor has signed an executive order to basically have the DCED look at some sort of comprehensive housing plan for Pennsylvania. Basically, I interpret it to be, how can we force the municipalities to have certain zoning and certain housing and whatever in their municipalities. What's interesting is that the DCED has come up with an actual survey that they're surveying that's available to residents in Pennsylvania to go and fill out. And it's a whole series of questions about things of, proximity to, how important is proximity to public services and education and
Ability.
a whole bunch of different things. Affordable housing, basically, is covered in here. Subsidized housing. And this is also organized not by municipality, it's organized by county and zip code. So for us, all of Newtown Township, all of Newtown Borough, half of Upper Makefield, 90% of Wrightstown would be covered under the perception of 18940. So it's kind of a PSATs is making sure that is saying that we as supervisors should be filling out this survey and putting in our own perspective as supervisors. So just don't let it, be up to the residents to do this. And also, where we have strong planning in place, as we do with the jointure, that ought to be incorporated in terms of just like you get a release for like 600 words. So we're not going to put a lot of stuff in there, but you can still, our joint planning and zoning, I think is a really good, feather in our cap for, how we place different types of uses within the jointure. So we need to make sure that the state is aware of that.
And our 10-year plan was just completed.
10-year plan is just complete, but that isn't, again, if they had their way, they could say, okay, we think that we need that core apartment building and Newtown sounds like a really good idea. In fact, not only have that one, but maybe you need to have 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah, they want to change, the legislature wants to change that law, saying that we should provide for everything, so.
It
So
won't be
that's
locally
really tough.
covered. It'll be more
Yeah, so we gotta be really tough, and I think what they're trying to do is by the edict as opposed to legislation, so I think the legislators are so far opposed to providing for this mandated zoning. But I think that they're trying to backdoor the requirements. So,
Well, and for now, the current legislation has died because there's no more sessions and it will have to be reintroduced next year if they decide to try to pursue it again.
right. Take a look at it.
Keep floating until it gets normalized.
But we'll see what happens. Anything else, guys?
Yes, I have served 2 years as treasurer. It's been a real honor. I didn't give 6 months' notice, so. Reorg meetings, somebody don't duck. Think about stepping up. It's very well organized. You get a shiny Dell. It's on Quicken. It's a couple hours a month. I'll coach you through it. So.
Where you going?
Well, I'm retiring. I did it for 2 years. Come on. That's enough punishment.
Just getting a rhythm though.
Yeah.
Hearing.
Now you're in a sweet.
I love this group logic, trying to guilt me into doing it.
Yeah, you did. Great job.
You're gonna come late. We all talked about this.
Is that a position you really can't retire from unless somebody else volunteers for it?
I guess I'll find out.
The worst part of changing secretary or is changing treasurers, you've got to go to the bank and sign all the cards again.
Mhm.
So at least I prefer doing it right now because I can just wave at the people and they're fine. I can do a drive-by.
That is true. It's very efficient over there.
All right. Any public comment from the audience? None? All right. So our next meeting, I've already put on the thing January 9th at 7 p.m. That, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Without exception. Have a great Christmas.